Good morning, everyone. Thanks for waking up with us this morning. My name is Zach Kramer, and welcome to our very first Coffee and Connections event hosted by the Young Professionals of Minneapolis. Coffee and Connections is an open discussion with local community leaders and young professionals to talk about the issues and actionable ways that we can make an impact in our community. Today's guest is Sydney, is it Velez? Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Sydney Velez, and she's from Emerge, and she'll be discussing economic equity in the MSP region. A little bit about Sydney. Her company Emerge is a local nonprofit, and they have a mission to reveal the potential in people and their communities through skill building, employment, and economic opportunity. And their vision is to create a world where all people have the opportunity to emerge and thrive. Emerge facilitates life change to eliminate the deep disparities plaguing our communities, and economic advancement is a central source of many other barriers facing our community. So they focus on their effort around economic opportunity, advancement, and stability, which delivers a noticeable impact in our broader community. Sydney is the communications coordinator for Emerge, and she oversees all communication campaigns, webmastering, public relations, promotions, and technology things involving with the organization. Her background is in public relations, branding, and marketing. And before Emerge, Sydney studied her master's degree in Spain while working for a global nonprofit focused on firearm violence prevention. She's always felt the call for public service and strives to use her professional skills to achieve further justice in the communities. And she's also a fellow YPM member. So good morning, Sydney, and thanks for waking up with us this morning.
Good morning. Happy to be here. I like mornings, so no stress from me.
So I guess to get started, Sydney, I'd like to recap the topic at hand, which is economic equity. And I'd really love to understand how your life journey led you to this cause and the reasons why you do what you do.
Great. Yeah, well, happy to share. The reasons why I connect to this work, I think, are the most important place for me to start. When I was a kid, my family has always been pretty poor, and we are a blended family. So we have mixed ethnicities, where my brother and I are Latin, and my sister's Filipino, and my mom is white. And we come from veterans who just were really poor. But then when my parents broke up, my brother, my mom, and I experienced homelessness and food insecurity for a long time, mixed with some mental illness. So that kind of is where I came from, with a background of struggling for things that normal people were using as a baseline. So when I was in high school, I was a breadwinner for my family, and I made the decision to go to college instead of staying home to take care of my family. And when I was in college, I felt a really big need to reach out to people that were like me, because unfortunately in college there's a level of privilege that just always is, because college is so expensive. So people who can afford it go, and that was very stressful for me because I couldn't connect to a lot of my peers. So I found nonprofits when I was a sophomore in college, and I was working at the YWCA in the Justice Department, or in the Mission Impact as it was called there. And I really loved that work. I knew I wanted to do communications because storytelling has always been my favorite part of being alive. It's dramatic, but absolutely true. And so I was working at Mission Impact at the YWCA. And then after that assignment ended, I wanted to work with more nonprofits. So I worked with Special Olympics and their headquarters. And I just continued that for a while, but then, people have to make money. So I took a corporate job right as college was ending, because I was working full time while I was in college. So I had a lot of time to figure out these jobs.
Wow.
And So I worked for Country Financial's headquarters in Illinois, and I worked on the corporate communications team. And I actually got to do a lot of really good work there, but it was disconnected from mission work, which I had already had time in that industry. So I was really missing that. And at that time, I applied for a Fulbright specifically because I wanted to research families like mine who experienced poverty and how that was reflected across the world. So I picked Spain because Spain was hit as hard economically as the United States was back in 2008, and how that trickled down to other families in different economic situations. So when I got to Spain, I did all of that research while I was getting a degree and working for a global nonprofit on gun violence. So all of those things I got to do at the same time, where they were meshing together, so I could kind of really figure out how I married purpose in my life with how I do my work. Because when I was working before in undergrad, I was working at an intern or associate level, and they pay slave wages. So it was important for me to figure out how that all meshed together. And I was always feeling the call that I had to work on behalf of the people, because to me, it didn't feel right to work. It was really dramatic when I was in my master's program. I was like, I can't work on the side of the oppressors. I have to work for just being beholden to people has always felt more authentic for me, and working for people that I can relate to serve people that were in situations that I was, and kind of give some of the roadmaps out that I was able to discover on my own. So when I came back to the States after Madrid, I started as an AmeriCorps member, but then unfortunately abandoned my post to take my job at Emerge, because Emerge specifically does economic development in North, where I actually grew up, where I was experiencing my homelessness and all the struggle with my family in North Minneapolis. And so I connected to the mission immediately. And while I was interviewing, I know it's always a little uncomfortable for people when I share that part of my story, but it was the most important thing for me to be able to connect to the mission work, and why I wanted to be at Emerge, and why I wanted to tell the story of people in North Minneapolis who are struggling. So long-winded answer, but that's kind of how I found my way back to mission work. I never really left it, but for a while I thought that I had to separate my work life from my internal passion about mission work, but now I have a good blend between the two.
That's great. Yeah, and I love that story, because what I hope all young professionals can hear from these interviews that we have with community leaders like yourself is you don't need to separate your passion and your job. And your involvement with the community can very well be your profession. And even if you have a corporate job, I feel like there is some type of opportunity to use the leverage of that position to be more involved with the community. I hope everyone takes that message away from all these conversations that we have every month, and apply that into their life.
Yeah.
So I guess moving into the issue at hand, economic equity. Can you elaborate a little more on what is the problem in our community with economic equity, and like what are the challenges? Who is affected by the challenges with that the most, and how it became a problem in the first place in this community?
Yeah, so Emerge specifically serves two distinct communities. So we serve in North Minneapolis, which is where I connect the most, and it's where I office out of usually. We also serve South Minneapolis, Cedar Riverside. So they're two very different communities. In North Minneapolis, we have Black Americans. That's the primary audience that we're talking to, and people who are experiencing any sort of economic disadvantage or barriers to employment. And in South Minneapolis and Cedar Riverside, we have a huge immigrant population who have barriers to employment based on citizenship status, based on language barrier, and cultural barriers to the type of work that is offered. And the situation for both of those communities stem from different problems. In North, the problem here is that it's basically been served as, you know, Black Americans have been living in North Minneapolis as it being kind of like offshooting of the Minneapolis community. It's where we've been herding Black folks to live in an isolated area. Even the light rail doesn't come through here. Less businesses are here, and it's just been a constant bleeding of jobs and economic opportunity. So what economic opportunity does exist here is currently being gentrified, and there's huge pockets of violence in the 4 districts inside of North. So Emerge, we specifically work with youth that are experiencing gang and clique violence, specifically because in Fowle and McKinley and all these smaller boroughs inside of North, there's gang activity that really stems from poverty and people not being able to take care of their families. So that is the rot that is essentially happening in North Minneapolis, is that what opportunities that do show up are stripped away from people of color here. And, the businesses that are thriving are not owned and operated by people who live here, which is unfortunate. So, and it's been isolated. So that's something that we see year after year in Emerge, where when they were drawing up city plans for Minneapolis, North is almost always left out or seen as a bad place to live because it's the highest population of people of color, it's the highest concentration of poverty, and the highest concentration of people re-entering the community after incarceration because it's over-policed. In South Minneapolis, similar to North Minneapolis with isolation and economic disadvantage, that's essentially where we stuff immigrants into these really, if you've seen the Cedar Riverside Towers with the really ugly primary color windows, walls, who could say, really, they're really ugly. Yeah. But in that 1 mile square radius is where we shove most immigrants in the Minneapolis community that are people of color, right? And the problem there is that when they're all in this one, smaller area, and they're removed from business centers in Minneapolis, and they have barriers to employment, like language and culture, and there's no bridge between their culture and work at all. So that's an employment deficit, is that there are so few jobs, and the jobs that do exist will not accept people with cultural barriers, and people are choosing their culture over work, which is an impossible choice to make.
Right.
So those are kind of the problem statements. Did I miss something?
No, I think that's good, and I think we can dive deeper in the follow-up questions. So I guess now that we all have a general awareness of the issues at hand, I like to talk about who are the organizations working on addressing this issue? Obviously Emerge, but are there other organizations that Emerge partners with or competes with that you guys are working on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to answer the question in the chat first. So cultural barriers, specifically in Cedar Riverside, a lot of them are East African. And they're following Islam or other things where they need to be able to pray, they need to have mother rooms, they need to work certain hours, and they have children that need different things in schools, but it takes them away from work. Just as a quick answer to that one. Okay. So the competitors and partners, nonprofits are a little bit better because we compete very rarely.
Towards a greater goal for the better.
Yes. In North, I know that there's Hired and North Achievement Zone that we work directly with, and Juxtaposition for our youth. So in North, we have tons of partners that are coming in or our ground up, like Juxtaposition is, where we put our workforce development strength with their artistic. In the case of Juxtaposition, they have an art focus. So if we have youth that are interested in that, we want to give them as many tracks as possible to keep them away from violence. So they work with Juxtaposition. We have local businesses that we partner with to be able to give people transitional jobs as they're exiting incarceration. And we own 3 social enterprise businesses so that we can provide jobs for people immediately, to kind of staunch the bleeding of not having a job, not having a place, not having any money, and then, going back into cycles of poverty, incarceration, those sorts of things, right? So that's on the north side that we work primarily with that. And Cedar Riverside, we actually have built our entire model there on a public-private partnership. So Cedar Riverside Opportunity Center, which I will now call CROC because it's very long. CROC is a partnership of Emerge, the City of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, Minneapolis College, and Miley Trans, and a couple of other private businesses where we all work together to kind of be a one-stop shop for employment. So Emerge will pre-train people, they'll get them work readiness, language barrier skills, help with childcare if they're an MFIP participant, and then we'll work with the partners to give them no gaps in between training and jobs. So we work with the city to get immediate jobs there because those are also really living wage, family sustaining jobs, because now we're not just looking at getting people jobs, we want to get them quality jobs that will be able to support them as they continue, as they have families or, just are pursuing more things. And with the private partners there and with educational partners, we're specifically working in nursing, trucking, construction, and in IT. So we work with partners all over the place. If I had to say something about Emerge, is that we are generally the person in the center of a bunch of other people cobbling together to face the same issue.
Very cool. And just so people know, I am recording this conversation and I plan on having a follow-up post with all these resources. So if you miss all those many partners, just so you know, we'll give you all that information after this. Also, a good thing for us to understand is obviously the year 2020 has been hard on our community for many reasons. Obviously, there's the pandemic, but I think more so related to this topic is the murder of George Floyd. And how has your organization and your partners, how have they reacted to this event, and what are you doing maybe differently in reaction to that?
Well, the murder of George Floyd is near and dear to all of our participants because we serve the Black community throughout Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. And what happened right after that for us is we went into mourning and shutdown so that people had space to breathe after that. And once we were back, we served people harder than ever, essentially. We started food events so that people could come in and get all of the necessary supplies. It was more than food too. We had cleaning supplies, we had hygiene supplies, and we had a PPE that was available to community members on a walk-in basis, and we were delivering to people's houses to kind of fill whatever need they told us that they wanted. So we work on a feedback loop with our community where we have community leaders that are on staff who tell us, hey, this is what the community needs right now, and this is not what the community needs. And we kind of adjust our strategies based on that. So Will Wallace is a pillar in the North community, and he talks to a lot of other leaders in the community, and he was like, hey, what we need right now is food, we need baby supplies, and because all of the grocery stores in North Minneapolis were affected right after, and they shut down for a period of time. So we were in a food desert for quite some time.
Mhm.
Um, so while we were doing that, we had people on staff who were going to neighboring suburbs to get all of this food and supplies, and we were handing that out at North and at South. But on South, we partnered with the Brian Coyle Center to be doing that because Sea Rock isn't, our building wasn't big enough to host there. So we were basically see a need, fill a need right after George Floyd was murdered. And we had a lot of peace rallies in North. That Emerge was a big presence in, where Will Wallace and the North Four guys, as well as other leaders of color from our organization, were out there kind of providing any sort of emotional support that they could, and telling people what services we can offer that kind of help with big gaps that were happening. And the pandemic has not been good to our participants either, and it makes us work even harder because, unfortunately, people of color in our communities that we serve are relegated to service jobs by necessity. So they're the people that are out there putting their lives on the line while the pandemic is raging on, right? They didn't get to go home. So we serve them with upskilling in that way and give them as much protective gear as we can, and try to support them in the emotional loss that the entire Black community is feeling up here.
Great. And so with those efforts, I guess, what are two things? What are your greatest challenges to in your efforts, and what do you need to be successful in addressing those?
Yeah, I mean, the greatest challenge is there's always the old standby where there's not enough talented young people that go into nonprofits, right? So people who don't bring their talent to the public sector, and that is easily solved by people looking for work in the public sector. But other big challenges that exist specifically for the problem statement is that not enough people are spending their dollars in North and in Cedar Riverside or venturing into there, and it's a perception problem. So we do a lot of work in the communities to serve the communities, but perception of them and property values and businesses and all sorts of things don't change until more people spend more time there, until we invest in the communities by showing up. And that's one of the easiest ways that people can participate, because it doesn't take a lot of your time, talent, or treasure to show up to eat Somali food, which is also really good. Just saying, I eat Somali food all the time. And so frequenting businesses in South and in North Minneapolis is the best way for people to be helping. And if you want to give more of your time volunteering with partners, there's always something to do. I take interns every term, and I know there are my colleagues that also take, we make volunteer events where people with skills that are useful to our participants can come and share their knowledge. So those are really great ways that people can individually help those problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I guess moving on to what can we do, before answering that question, what is the consequence of us not doing anything? What if this issue is ignored and continues to be ignored in our community? What is the worst case scenario of what will happen to the greater MSP region?
Yeah, I have a feeling that there are two ways to answer that question. There is the worst case scenario for people involved and the worst case scenario for y'all, right? Because I'm not sure if any of you live in North or experience these sorts of things, right? The worst case scenario for people who are in this situation right now, for our community members that are in North and in Cedar Riverside, the worst is that we continue to see jobs running away from these areas, which creates more dilapidated communities, and property values go low, people are engaging in more violence, there's more policing, which is not what we need. more policing, more incarceration, and more people re-entering the community who aren't able to support themselves when they come out, so then back into prisons. Um, and it kind of erodes entire communities to where there's no way that we can serve people anymore because there's nothing for us to give them if there are no jobs that come to this area. The worst case scenario for people who are technically not in those communities is we're going to see, I mean, it's called ghettoization, where there are areas of the city that are going to be deemed as dangerous. People are not going to be going into there. Any people in the surrounding areas are going to feel the stigma that are happening. And it's, if people care about the social justice aspect, there's going to be even more people hurting and it will continue to spread, right? So it's not just isolated to North Minneapolis, it continues to spread southward. And in Cedar Riverside, it will continue to erode immigrant communities. And people who are throughout the entire city who engage with immigrant communities will see another barrier go up between people who are immigrants and people who are not. There's going to be less of that crossover, which is really healthy for vibrant cities.
Gotcha. It almost sounds like a disease or coronavirus that if we don't address the issue, it'll spread into our community and negatively affect all of us.
Yeah, because I mean, communities that are in a squeeze don't just stay in one place. So that's been studied over time. Is if forced to move out of places that are already diseased, they'll go into other communities to try to seek opportunities, but then people in those communities that they're trying to go into will push back. And that's a really unfortunate thing because it turns citizens against themselves, you know,
Yeah.
because people in North are our fellow brethren, right? They're not any different really as humans than people in Northeast, which we butt up against. So I live in North. I live in the Fowl neighborhood. And I'm right across from Northeast, and that's something I see all the time. Even when people who come from North will go into Northeast, it's not very welcoming because it's almost like some people in Northeast can just tell that people across the bridge are poorer.
I can definitely understand. I live in Northeast, so I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's crazy because we're in the same district for cleaning up cities, right? But if you go over the Lowry Bridge, just over into North is dramatically different on the attention that's given to streets and buildings, and we're in the same district for cleaning.
Well, yeah, if you want to see the most obvious difference, you have North Minneapolis, and then you cross the Lowry Bridge, and there's a freaking Ferris wheel to celebrate. Hey, you're in Northeast.
Yes.
Fun place to be. So,
Yes.
That's a very obvious visual difference that you can see for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess you've hinted at a few things, but what can us as young professionals, obviously we're calling to action everyone in the community, but specifically young professionals that have a extra bit of empathy and innovation and creativity. What can we do to make an impact on this issue?
Well, young professionals are the ones that have the empathy and the energy, and that's the most important part for tackling these really bigger issues. And I mean, like I was saying earlier, you really just have the three ways to be giving back to any one issue. You have your time, talent, or treasure. If you want to become a donor, millennials actually are encroaching to being the most generous generation because they do smaller gifts at more frequency, right? So I sit on the development team, and we have an entire campaign for young people who give $5 a month, and that consistent revenue is actually useful to do entire sections of our business. Mm-hmm. So that's a really great low stakes way. And like I said, young professionals can look in the public sector for an issue they care about and infuse their professional career with working on behalf of a community. I always find that incredibly fulfilling. And you can also donate your time. So volunteering with any of the partners, there's always something to do, always. And the best part is that young professionals always bring an innovative look at it. And unfortunately, in nonprofits, we have a chaos mentality where we're always working to keep up with the demand. So having people come in with a fresh perspective and just some new ideas is always useful. So those volunteer slots, they're not just, soup kitchen stuff. It's where you come in, you're like, hey, I think I have some ideas for programming that might serve people better. We've seen a couple of people come through who give us that, and it's invaluable.
And is there I'm sure reaching out to any of your partners would be a great start, but is there like a centralized resource or organization that young professionals can go to talk for people that don't really know what they want to do? They're like, I just want to help, but I don't know if I want to give my time or my money or my skills, or I don't know how to best incorporate all three of those. Is there, rather than relying on them to figure it out for themselves and then acting on it, is there a certain organization that they can talk to guide them to how to best use those three things?
Well, unfortunately, no. The short answer is no. For nonprofits, there's not a centralized thing for volunteering or donating or things like that. So you kind of got to pick a section, but then there are always those informational interviews where you talk about like, hey, are there spots? Is there anything that really interests me in these organizations? And to look at a directory of nonprofits, though, you can go to the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits if you want to see everything stacked up against each other, right? So you can find anything you're looking for there, but you do kind of got to narrow down a few issues that you care about and then go looking for those organizations because there's so many of them in every area. And you'll be able to find ones based on that issue from MCN.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like a great opportunity too for the people on this call that maybe want to start their own nonprofit. Why don't you create a centralized source to help people get more involved with the community rather than have your own cause within the community? You can help bridge the gap there.
Love that innovation, entrepreneurial spirit. I dig it.
Get on that, Lana.
Get on that, Lana.
I'm busy enough. I'm sure someone else can do it. I'll help though.
All right. Well, I guess now we'll open it up to other people on the call to just ask questions, and we'll try to facilitate those best we can. So, anyone have any questions for Sydney? Dalton?
Thanks, Sydney. That was a really fun conversation. I said I was going to have my camera off and be multitasking, and you kind of pulled me in, and I paid attention. So, nice
good. I'm glad.
I have a few things for you, but my first question, I'd love to hear kind of your take on gentrification. You mentioned it once. Obviously, like cities get old and need to be revitalized. It feels really good and healthy to have new city developments, new housing, like all this stuff. It doesn't feel good when they bulldoze sections of our neighborhoods and put up big buildings. Oftentimes, they feel disconnected. And then particularly, I'd like to hear your take on the North Harbor project in North Minneapolis. From someone who loves concerts and loves outdoor venues, and I think the prospect of having a really cool outdoor venue along the river is really awesome. I also see its implications. So my question is kind of like, what are your thoughts on gentrification, and like, how do we improve areas of the city without the negative sides of gentrification?
Yeah, I mean, the thin line between what we're going for is revitalization. When it turns into gentrification is when you ignore the perspectives of people who already live there. So that's kind of the way that I delineate it, and the way the participants have changed their opinions based on it, because revitalization has been happening in North for, I think, about about 8 years now. And it's a slower process. It takes in more people's perspectives from the community rather than coming from outside in. It comes as a collaborative. And that's the difference between gentrification and revitalization. I mean, we did West Broadway was revitalized. Emerge was one of the partners that helped do that. And the only way that it was able to happen to where it didn't turn into gentrification is that it was empowering business owners that were already there, how to expand and how to reach a broader audience and how to generate that revenue without replacing those jobs for people coming from the suburbs to make money in there. So, I mean, it's always tricky because people want to come in and they want to help. And I don't think there's an insidious thought process that comes with that. And it's uncomfortable to listen to a community that might not communicate the way that you do and might not have really nice things to say up front. And it takes longer, but that's the way that people can revitalize a community, can make it newer, can clean it up, and to do those sorts of things if they're addressing the pain points that the community members themselves have already identified. So, and with the harbor project, so we have a lot of mixed feelings in Emerge. So we have an entire smaller work group that talks about that because we were considering jumping on the project to be one of the operating partners to make it happen. And Will Wallace is still involved in those talks, so we don't have any resolution on that yet, but there is discussion inside whether that is going to be more of a help or a hindrance for the area, because it will bring a lot of foot traffic essentially. But as we see with other concert sites, it will be deserted after, and there's so much trash around there that will it actually improve that area of the river? Will it improve that area of the community? A lot of people are unsure because people who go to concerts while they're having a great time, are they very kind to the land? Not usually. Yeah. So, you know, that one's a very mixed bag.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. I think like one of the interesting perspective or questions I have around gentrification is like things are accelerating so quickly. Like we're seeing it as in information and technology, obviously, but like building materials, city infrastructure, like things that are being built right now are oftentimes being built out of date. Like the moment that the new doors open on a lot of buildings or roads or infrastructure projects, they're already built out of date. And so like, I understand that like a slower process definitely like helps kind of nurture things up. Where's the like, I worry though that like areas of the city that are pumping money into infrastructure projects or into things much faster are just gonna like outpace even more these areas, and at a certain point there will always be resistance to change. And like where's the fine line between just like the city needs to upgrade, like this change will be uncomfortable and it will be good afterwards, is something that people don't want to hear. You know,
right? But that's a more privileged standpoint, right? That we're gonna do change and you'll like it afterward.
Yep. 100%.
We do have partners at the city where we talk about infrastructure, and the building time is about the same. So that's not the slower part. It's getting people on board in the beginning. So that just means reaching out and creating a space for the community leaders. And we did that in Cedar Riverside when we were making the Opportunity Center because it's a newer building. And the talking stage took a little longer, right? And by longer, I mean months longer, not necessarily years longer. So it'll still be revitalization in terms of the actual building will be about the same amount of time, give or take a few months. But the extra legwork that goes in to get more community on board during the process and after the process to kind of, mitigate the resistance to change that you're talking about, that takes a lot more work in a community that is distrustful than it is in a community like, if it's downtown Minneapolis, you make the change and people don't really like the change, but they're not they don't feel betrayed by the change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's more the talking stage that takes more nuance.
So if I'm hearing you, the difference between revitalization and gentrification is literally just more deep and meaningful conversation with the community.
Yeah. And honoring the conversation, right? We had a couple of projects that went wrong because they had that space to discuss it. And the final decision was the exact opposite of what the community leaders were telling them, right? And so it was a very shallow effort because they brought all the community leaders together, listened to them, and then betrayed their trust by doing the opposite.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And Sydney, I wonder if Colin, I'll get right to you, but I quickly want to follow up on that. And I think our network of the young professionals in Minneapolis can really help empower the support for what Emerge and your partners are doing to represent the community and how it's going to affect that. And I want us to get involved as much as we can so that, all of our members are aware of how all this revitalization is going to affect the community, so we can fight for the people in there rather than having big corporate decide what's going to happen. So keep us in mind, and we'll continue to talk on that. Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. I really appreciate this. This has been great. My wife and I are fostering and in the process of adopting a 5-year-old
I love
twins.
that.
Mixed race twins, and it's been a hell of a ride. But one of the things, they were just kind of getting to the age where we felt it was meaningful for them to start going out and doing volunteering in the community and things like that, and kind of seeing that aspect. And then COVID hit, and we're not taking them out to things.
That makes sense.
Both during the pandemic, but also especially after the pandemic, what are things that we can do to kind of help raise them in a way to be thoughtful about these things and kind of be good members of their community? I mean, they came from one community, they're growing up in a very different community. And we're trying to give them as much sort of cultural appreciation and whatnot as we can in the house. And unfortunately, now we can't go out and meet other human beings.
Yeah,
so is there anything you'd recommend both during and after pandemic for both those things?
Yeah, I mean, joining the community doesn't have to be an in-person thing. It's the best if it is. But in the stopgap in between, a lot of like Tara Mayfield, our VP of programs, she's a woman of color, grew up in North, and also went through some of our programs. And her kids, she talks a lot about how she raised them in the community to believe that all of the people there were whole and healthy and worthy of all the things that her kids were worthy of. And to form that connection through stories, through showing up, much of the community events are being live streamed right now, and getting into programming that are reflective of people that look like them. So there's lots of really great children's, I don't remember how old you're 5? Yeah, so children's books are really going to be the places where, as you expose them to more and more of things that represent their community, it'll start to feel really normal. And if you want to instill service learning, that's something that is going to be on hold during the pandemic, unfortunately. But right after, getting into any sort of ride-along volunteering. So if you're volunteering with communities that look like your kids rather than you, that's going to do all the difference to really bridge that gap. So Tara talks a lot about how her kids went through stages like that, and it was the most important to see people all the time. So it wasn't necessarily that they had to interact with them all the time, but seeing them was enough from a distance for a while until they did it together. So doing it with you will make them feel safe and connected, which is very fun. Also love that. Are you doing the cultural training that comes with having different ethnicity children? Yeah.
So much of that. It was really bizarre when one of them started insisting that he was whiter than we were, and would cry and scream if we tried to tell him otherwise.
Oh no.
Needless to say, there were a lot of trips to the library after that to get a lot of different books, and there's been a lot of improvement on that. So
Yeah, and that's
progress.
heartbreaking too.
It's one of those things where it's like we didn't really get how much that was instilled already, and so we really had to take a sharp turn on stuff.
Which is, I mean, my sister feels like that sometimes too, where she's like, the standard of goodness is placed on whiteness, and getting away from that is really difficult, especially when the people you love in your life that are your role models are white. So, you know, that takes a lot of uncomfortable legwork.
For
and,
sure.
you know, I salute you. Samantha?
So, quick question for you, Colin. What ethnicity are?
They are quite a mix. They are Black, Native, and white, all at unknown ratios.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
And then
But
I had
visibly, you would probably identify them as light-skinned Black.
yeah, same here. And I'm a very light-skinned Black person. I literally I have days where I'm like I look more white. And then I have other days where I'm like, I look more Black, you know, in the summer, I'm like, yes, I'm getting that tan, you know, but definitely kind of being racially ambiguous can create some identity challenges, um, and definitely wanting to be more white. Um, like I've definitely, you know, kind of felt that too.
Yeah, my
Um,
sister's in her 30s. She still struggles with it. Because she's like, that's what's accepted. And she didn't have a lot of connections to her ethnicity before. And that's a little bit harder too if you're removed from it.
oh, absolutely. And Sydney, I had a question for you too. Well, yeah, I wanted to say thank you too. And just starting in with your personal story was amazing. Just hearing what you've gone through, and I can relate on a lot of personal levels as well. And it just goes to show that you have no idea what people have been through until they tell you. You don't know. You can't make any assumptions about somebody's life experiences. And so I think it's really incredible that you tell that story. And you had mentioned earlier on that you know you are able to tell the stories of people in North Minneapolis, and I was wondering what that looks like. What types of things do you do on a communications level to tell those stories?
Yeah, we do it in a lot of ways that emerge. Currently, I'm working on a video project since June 2nd, which is when we started up all of our response to um, all of our formalized response to the George Floyd uh, events. And it's where I follow stories of our young men who are in North 4, who are escaping cycles of violence. So video projects is one way that we do it. I do success stories quarterly where I reach out to all the people we're serving and I sit down and kind of interview them. Our most recent was Antonio Williams. He also was one of our reentry clients, and I sit to interview them and interpret their story and bring it to as many populations as possible. So with Antonio, we specifically brought it to funders, which always feels a little slimy because funders want poverty porn. But we work together to kind of make it something authentic to him that we can tell so that other people feel less alone with it. But in terms of modes, we also do features on people in our community, pillars of our community is what we call them, where we tell their story in two ways when we do features. We tell it in a way that is digestible for people outside of the community, and ways that they can relate to their peers so that they form more connections to create community bonds, because those are sometimes not as developed as they could be because they're in smaller pockets. And we want to expand that so that most of North feels connected to most of North rather than just within their family circle, or within their friend circle that's not serving them. So that's how I work with participants to tell their story.
That's awesome. I really I like that. Definitely, like you've been talking about combining passion with your work, and that sounds like a perfect combination right there.
Yeah, and especially because I mean, from my personal perspective, my family has very different opinions on sharing our story because of different levels of comfort. And for me, it's always a tool of healing to tell my story as if it's mine, and that I get to, every time I retell it, it assuages a little bit of the rawness of it. I mean, I'm far removed from it now, which is great, but it also comes with it a feeling that you want to ignore it. And that's not really good for your healing. It's more easy for me to lead with that part of my life because it informs all of my decisions, all of them.
Absolutely.
What's up, Colin?
Yeah, I actually had one other thing. You had mentioned that you host events where people can share knowledge. I'm a financial advisor, and I know that even when I'm working with clients who are from middle class or upper middle class backgrounds, most of them don't, they never really got any sort of financial education. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly people who grew up in generational poverty didn't, both because their parents obviously never knew and their schools mostly weren't teaching that.
Yeah.
So I would love to talk to you about how do I, and it's something I've been trying to find a good way of doing it, and that just, you're the perfect person to talk to. How do
Heck
I
yeah.
go about making sure I want to try to help people out of that situation? Give free consults to the people when you find them jobs to help them know what to do with that money, or free personal finance classes if you want to get some people together that need that.
Yeah, we have a financial wellness department, and I'm sure Nina would love to talk to you about it.
All right.
I'll write it down.
Yeah, and I know we're wrapping up at the end of the hour here, but Colin, that's a great idea, and I'd love to be looped in that conversation because we have a lot of financial advisors that are YPM members, and I think it'd be really valuable for them to get that understanding of how they can help these people that that lack a background in financial education.
Yeah.
So that'd be great. So
similarly, sorry, as a recruiter, I same thing, and I also texted a business of that I know that hires nurses and caregivers, and he's like always looking for people, so he wants to connect with you guys as well.
Awesome. Love it.
Cool. So wrapping up, this far exceeded my expectations of this event. This is our very first Coffee and Connections event, and I think we blew it out of the park. Thank you very much, Sydney. What a amazing story, and I love the work that you do, and I hope it really inspires everyone on the call today to really make a difference in using their time, their skills, and their money to make an impact in the community.
And I'm available for anybody after this too. Y'all have my information. Feel free to share it wide. I love talking to new people. So
yeah. So just to wrap things up, in summary, Cindy, what is the one thing that we all on the call can do to spark a domino effect that will create positive change in the community? One actionable thing to do.
the most actionable thing that you can do is to talk to everybody about these community organizations, so that either you're showing up to show your support or donating your time. So having those conversations interpersonally, like me coming to talk to you, and it spreads to 5 more people, and then 5 more people after that, that's the best way to help a nonprofit.
Awesome. And so where can people go to learn more about you and your organization and how to make an impact?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. We just finished making an entirely new, brand new website. So it's emerge-mn.org. And you can see more about our work there, success stories. And we have a volunteer page and an info account. So any other questions that come through there will be routed to the people who head up those programs.
Awesome. Thank you, Sydney. I'll be following up with you later to just make sure we have compiled all of the many resources that you shared with us, and we will follow up with all of our members of the summary of the takeaways of this conversation, all the resources to share with you, so that you can share it with other people who will share it with other people who will share it with other people, and we can really make a positive impact in our